Tonight, somewhere in the world, someone is standing over a grave. They are wearing black or white or nothing special at all. They are holding flowers or dirt or the hand of a stranger. They are saying words they have said before, words their parents said, words that go back further than anyone in that circle can remember. You have probably stood there too. And if you are honest with yourself, you felt something you could not explain. Not just grief, something older, something that felt almost like a rule, like your body already knew what to do before your mind caught up. Here is the strange truth. It did. The way you behave when someone dies is not a cultural invention. It is not something your civilization built. It is a behavioral inheritance so ancient it predates language, predates farming, predates cities, predates almost everything you think of as human. And when you pull back the layers of ritual and religion and tradition, what you find underneath is one of the most surprising and unsettling stories in the entire history of your species. Your ancestors did not always bury their dead. For most of human prehistory, for hundreds of thousands of years, the response to death was not what you might expect. Anthropologist Paul Pettit, who has spent decades mapping prehistoric mortuary behavior, describes the earliest phase as what he calls passive indifference. The body was left where it fell, not abandoned out of cruelty, not ignored out of ignorance, left because the group had to keep moving, because survival did not pause for loss, because the living had no margin to give the dead. This was not heartless, it was honest. The body returned to the earth without ceremony, without marker, without memory frozen in stone. And yet, something changed. Around 300,000 years ago, something began to shift in the archaeological record. Quietly, inconsistently at first, then with increasing force. The earliest sign is not a burial, it is placement. At a site called Atapuerca in northern Spain, researchers found the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals at the bottom of a deep shaft deep inside a cave system. The shaft is called the Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. These bodies were not randomly scattered. They were not the remains of predator kills. They had been carried to that shaft and dropped in, deliberately, repeatedly, over what appears to be an extended period of time. The individuals were Homo heidelbergensis, a species that predates modern humans by roughly 200,000 years. They were not us, but they were doing something that looks unmistakably like what we do. Paleoanthropologist Juan Luis Arzuaga, who has led excavations at Atapuerca for decades, has argued that this is evidence of something profound. These early humans were treating their dead as different from other matter. They were separating the bodies of the dead from the bodies of animals. They were doing something intentional with the remains of individuals who had mattered to them. Was it grief? Was it fear? Was it something else entirely? The honest answer is that no one fully knows. What archaeologists can tell you is what they found alongside those bodies. A single hand axe. A beautiful, symmetrical, rose-colored quartzite hand axe that has no practical explanation for being in that shaft. No butchery, no useware suggesting it was dropped accidentally. Just one tool, placed with the dead. Researchers call it Excalibur. It is the oldest known grave good in the world. Something was being communicated. To the dead, or to whatever might lie beyond them, or to the living who came after. We cannot decode that message. But the fact that a message was being sent at all changes everything about how you understand human nature. Because here is the thing that researchers like archaeologist April Noel point out. When you treat the dead as meaningful, you are doing something no other animal on Earth does in the same way. You are acknowledging that this person existed. You are asserting that their existence had weight. You are performing for the first time in the history of life on this planet something that looks like the concept of personhood. You are saying, this one mattered. That is not instinct. That is not biology. That is the birth of something almost impossible to name. Skip forward roughly 200,000 years. Homo sapiens has arrived, and with your species comes something new, intentional burial with ceremony. At a site called Sungir in Russia, dating to around 34,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered burials that stopped everyone who studied them cold. An older man, buried on his back, covered from head to toe in thousands of ivory beads that had been painstakingly sewn onto his clothing. More than 3,000 beads. Researchers calculated that each bead took roughly 45 minutes to make. That is over 2,000 hours of labor for a burial, for a dead man. Nearby, 2 adolescents were buried head-to-head, each also adorned with thousands of beads, with mammoth ivory spears and carved figurines placed alongside them. Think about what that means. A community of hunters and gatherers, people who were surviving on the edge, who needed every hour of every day to feed themselves and avoid predators, spent thousands of hours making tiny ivory beads to bury with their dead. They were not doing this for survival. They were doing it for something else. Something that archaeologist Randall White, who has studied the Sungir burials extensively, describes as evidence of deeply held beliefs about a person's status continuing beyond death. Your ancestors believed the dead were still going somewhere, and that belief changed everything. Once you believe the dead are going somewhere, you have to help them get there. You have to send them with things they will need: tools, food, weapons, clothing. You have to speak to them. You have to mark the place where they went. You have to come back to that place. And in coming back, you create something that has never existed before in the history of life: a relationship between the living and the dead. That relationship is strange and powerful, and it does not go away. It accumulates. Generation after generation returns to the place where their people went. They leave things, they speak, they remember, and the dead become something new. They become ancestors. Ancestors, it turns out, are one of the most powerful organizing forces in all of human society. Anthropologist Harvey Whitehouse, whose research into ritual and social cohesion has reshaped how scholars understand human groups, has shown that ancestor veneration is one of the most consistent features across all known human cultures. Not a feature of some cultures, not a feature of more advanced civilizations, a feature of all of them. The dead watch, the dead judge, the dead can help or harm. The dead must be respected, fed, honored, consulted. In ancient China, emperors burned paper goods to send to their ancestors in the afterlife. In ancient Rome, families maintained small household shrines to their family dead and offered them food at regular intervals. In the cultures of the Pacific Islands, the bones of ancestors were kept in homes, worn as jewelry, consulted before battle. In many African traditions, the boundary between the living and the ancestral dead is understood not as a wall but as a thin membrane, permeable in both directions, trafficked daily. These are not primitive superstitions. These are solutions. Because the ancestor is doing something functionally brilliant for a social group. The ancestor is a moral authority that cannot be bribed, cannot be killed, cannot be corrupted, and never gets tired. The ancestor enforces cooperation across generations. The ancestor gives the group a shared identity that extends backward in time, giving every member of the group roots that go deeper than any individual life. When a Neolithic farmer in what is now Britain spent weeks constructing a long barrow tomb for his dead, he was not wasting time. He was building social infrastructure. He was making his community real. He was saying, "We came from people, and those people still belong to us. And this place is where that claim is staked in stone." And that claim created something revolutionary: territory, belonging, home. Archaeologist Christopher Tilley has argued that the megalithic monuments of prehistoric Europe were not primarily religious in the modern sense. They were statements of relationship. Here our dead lie, therefore this land is ours. Therefore we are a people. Death did not just produce grief. Death produced property. Death produced identity. Death produced politics. And somewhere in this long, strange history, another thing happened. Something quieter. Something that might be the most human thing of all. People began to grieve privately. In the earliest periods, the response to death was collective and functional. The group responded, the group moved on. But as burial became more elaborate, as the dead became more real as individuals, the living began to experience loss in a new and more specific way. Not just the loss of a member of the group, the loss of a person, a particular voice, a particular face, a person who knew things about you that no one else knew. Neuroscientist Mary Frances O'Connor, whose research on grief focuses on what happens to the brain after loss, describes grief as the cost of attachment. Her work shows that the regions of the brain that activate during grief are the same regions that activate when the brain is searching for something it expects to find. You are not just sad. Your brain is literally looking for someone who is no longer there. It keeps expecting them, and they don't come. That experience, that specific private ache, is not separate from the rituals your ancestors built. It is the engine behind them. Ritual is what you do when your brain cannot stop searching and your hands need something to hold. You dig, you carry, you place, you speak, you mark, you return. You do not do this because it works in any practical sense. You do it because doing nothing is unbearable. And here's what is remarkable. That impulse, that need to do something with the dead, to treat them as still mattering, to insist on their significance, is one of the things that makes human civilization possible. Because once you can care about someone after they are gone, you can care about people who are not yet born. You can plant trees whose shade you will never sit in. You can build cathedrals that will take generations to finish. You can create art for an audience you will never meet. You can write laws for people who do not yet exist. The capacity for this kind of time-extended care that reaches beyond the limits of your own life, is arguably the thing that separates human civilization from every other form of social life on Earth. And it started with a body, and a choice to treat that body as if it still mattered. Tonight, somewhere in the world, someone is standing over a grave. They are carrying something forward, across 100,000 years, that began with a hand axe left in a dark pit and a species that had just discovered, for the very first time, that a life could be worth remembering. They do not know this, but their body does.